Three brothers, a father who didn't speak in a low voice, a brand of their own before the oldest played a single minute in the NBA. Suddenly, it wasn't just basketball, it was spectacle, it was defiance. It was a family telling the world they didn't need Nike, that they didn't need anyone, that they could build their own empire. Very expensive sneakers, incendiary interviews, a reality show, statements that seemed impossible to sustain, yet still dominated headlines. For a moment, everything seemed to move in a straight line toward greatness. But when the noise is that loud from the beginning, when the brand grows faster than the results, when the narrative is more ambitious than the structure, something starts to crack. We're not just talking about talent, we're talking about an idea sold as a revolution, and the question isn't whether the brothers knew how to play. The question is, what was really being built behind all that noise? Before Big Bowler brand existed as a product, it already existed as a narrative. In the 2015 to 2016 season, Chino Hills finished 35-0 and won the California State Championship. Lonzo, LiAngelo, and LaMelo sharing the court, transition dunks, no-look passes, shots from anywhere. The Ball last name started circulating all over the internet, but the phenomenon wasn't built on highlights alone. In March 2017, months before the draft, LeVar Ball told USA Today he was seeking a deal close to $1 billion for his three sons. He wasn't talking about an individual contract, he was talking about a family package. He even proposed a long-term structure, something like $100 million distributed over 10 years. The message was clear: they weren't negotiating from humility, they were negotiating as if they were already legends. The comparisons to Michael Jordan, the statements that Lonzo was better than Stephen Curry, the verbal confrontations on television, nothing seemed accidental. Every sentence raised the expectation a little higher. When negotiations with the major brands didn't move forward under the model he proposed, the narrative shifted. It was no longer, we want a contract, it was, we don't need them. And that's when something bigger than a simply talented family began to take shape. An identity started to form, rebellious, independent, willing to go against the system. The boys' talent was real, but the public conversation stopped revolving solely around the game. The last name was no longer just a sports project, it was a brand in the making. June 22nd, 2017, Barclays Center, New York. The Los Angeles Lakers select Lonzo Ball with the number 2 pick in the draft. He wasn't just another rookie, it was the most media-covered franchise on the planet. In full post-Kobe reconstruction, betting on the kid who arrived with more noise than any other prospect of his generation. In his 2017 to 2018 season, he showed real things. He finished the year averaging 10.2 points, 7.2 assists, and 6.9 rebounds per game. For a 20-year-old point guard, that wasn't bad at all. He had vision, size, defensive ability, but the conversation wasn't, can he be a very good point guard? The conversation was, is he the next face of the league? And that's when the friction began. From the first month, his shooting mechanics were under constant scrutiny. The release came from the left side of his body, unorthodox, slow by NBA standards. In March 2018, Lakers reports confirmed he would work on adjustments to his form over the summer. It wasn't a minor detail. When you're the number 2 pick and you arrive wrapped in massive comparisons, every weakness gets amplified. Then came the first serious setback. On January 19th, 2019 against the Houston Rockets, he suffered a grade 3 ankle sprain. What seemed like just another injury ended up sidelining him for the rest of the season. That was the beginning of a pattern that started to repeat: discomfort, setbacks, long stretches off the court. In 2019, he was traded to the New Orleans Pelicans in the package that sent Anthony Davis to Los Angeles. There, he showed interesting flashes and even improved his three-point percentage in the 2019 to 2020 season. But consistency never fully settled in, and just when he seemed to find stability with the Chicago Bulls in the 2021 to 2022 season, his body intervened again. Persistent issues in his left knee, medical procedures, recoveries that stretched longer than expected, interrupted seasons. The original narrative placed him as the visible face of a family empire, the sporting leader of a brand that promised to change the industry. But while the discourse remained enormous, his career began to turn fragile, and in the NBA, fragility waits for no one. If Lonzo carried the weight of the empire, LiAngelo was the one who had to sustain the narrative that this wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't one talented son with a loud father. It was 3. A dynasty in the making. In November 2017, while UCLA was touring China to open the college season, the first serious blow to that image occurred. LiAngelo Ball was detained along with 2 teammates after an incident at a Louis Vuitton store in Hangzhou. Chinese police intervened. They spent several days in custody before the case was resolved diplomatically, and they returned to the United States. The episode went global. It wasn't a minor mistake, it was an international scandal. UCLA announced his indefinite suspension from the program. Days later, LiAngelo offered a public apology at a press conference. The narrative of discipline and greatness began to crack. Shortly after, he left UCLA without ever officially debuting in an NCAA game. The decision was for him to play professionally in Lithuania with Vytautas Prienai-Vištonas, a secondary European league. The move was presented as independence from the American college system, but for many, it was a forced exit. He tried to carve out a path in different settings: Summer League with the Los Angeles Lakers in 2018, brief opportunities in the G League, non-guaranteed contracts, always on the edge, never inside the true NBA core. The scoring talent he had shown in high school never fully translated to the professional level. The initial promise spoke of 3 future NBA players dominating the league at the same time. But while one battled injuries and the other was still developing, LiAngelo began to drift into an uncomfortable space, the famous last name, without a stable place at the highest level. And when the second pillar starts to wobble, the dynasty narrative no longer sounds so solid. While the media spotlight was focused on Lonzo and LiAngelo's college scandal, the youngest took a different path. LaMelo Ball did not follow the traditional route. No NCAA, no college campus. In 2018, he went through Lithuania alongside his brother in an experience that was more media-driven than developmental. But the decisive move came afterward. In 2019, he signed with the Illawarra Hawks in Australia's NBL. It wasn't a typical destination for an American prospect of that level. It was a risk. Real professional competition, grown men, a different structure. In the 2019 to 2020 season, he averaged around 17 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 6.8 assists per game. At that point, he was no longer just a last name, he was production. In November 2020, he was selected with the number 3 pick in the draft by the Charlotte Hornets. And this time, the narrative didn't have to push as hard. In his 2020 to 2021 rookie season, he won the Rookie of the Year award, becoming the youngest player in franchise history to achieve it. His style, creative, unpredictable, with deep shooting range, didn't feel like an echo of his father's discourse, it felt genuine. In February 2022, he was selected as an all-star for the first time, not because of marketing, because of performance. Averages above 20 points per game, playmaking ability, clear offensive impact. Later, he signed a maximum extension with Charlotte, the only one of the 3 who ultimately established himself as a true central piece of a franchise. That breaks part of the easy theory. If it had all been smoke, none of them would have made it. If it had all been exaggeration without substance, the youngest wouldn't be competing at the highest level. LaMelo proves there was talent, that it wasn't just spectacle. But it also exposes something more uncomfortable, the difference between athletic development and business narrative. Because while his career was growing on the court, the brand that carried the family name was beginning to fade off it. While the brothers were trying to carve out their paths on the court, the real gamble was happening off it. May 2017, Big Baller Brand officially launched the ZO2, Lonzo Ball's first signature sneaker, price $495, signed version $995. There was no precedent for something like this without the backing of a major brand. The sales model was pre-order based, there was no immediate stock in physical stores, you bought online and waited. The narrative was total independence, no Nike, no Adidas, no intermediaries, but when a company sells a premium product without consolidated industrial infrastructure, every delay becomes a cause for suspicion. At the same time, comparisons began circulating with Brand Black, a company founded by a former Skechers executive reportedly involved in the manufacturing of the shoe. The promise was revolution. The reality seemed far more handcrafted than the price suggested. In 2018, they attempted a relaunch with the ZO 2.19 at a lower price, around $200. It was an attempt to reset the narrative, but the problems didn't disappear. Delays continued, credibility was already damaged, and then came the internal fracture. Alan Foster, co-founder and financial operator of the brand, was accused by Lonzo of diverting approximately $1.5 million from his personal and business accounts. The split was public. Lawsuits, countersuits, cross-accusations. At one point, the Big Baller Brand website even redirected to Foster's personal domain, a strange symbol for a company that had sold itself as a fortified family empire. What had begun as a declaration of independence from corporations ended up turning into an internal conflict that exposed the lack of professional structure. The promised revolution was no longer competing against Nike, it was trying to survive itself. Up to that point, everything could be debated on a narrative level. Exaggerated hype, aggressive marketing, internal conflict, but there's a point where the conversation stops being ideological and becomes concrete. The product. When the ZO2 hit the market in May 2017, LeVar publicly stated that sales were strong. However, estimates from specialized sites like NaceKicks and later reports from the Los Angeles Times suggested that the actual number of pairs sold in the first few days was far below what was being implied in the media. Not thousands, just a few hundred. It wasn't the impact of a revolution, it was something much smaller. The pre-order model started to work against them. Within a few months, reports of shipping delays and customer complaints began to surface. There was even a redesign of the original model before many buyers received their pair. The narrative was still big, but the consumer experience was beginning to create friction. And then something more uncomfortable came. In 2019, well removed from the initial launch, Lonzo Ball spoke on his podcast, The WAE Show. No controversy, no manufacturer scandal. He simply said that during his rookie season, he had to change sneakers every quarter because they were breaking, that the shoe wasn't ready. It wasn't an outside complaint. It was the face of the brand himself acknowledging that the product wasn't up to standard. That's where the discussion shifts. It's no longer whether the price was high. It's no longer whether the narrative was exaggerated. It's whether the structure was prepared to manufacture something that justified what was being charged. Because when a brand presents itself as a premium alternative to Nike, but its main player admits the shoe couldn't withstand a full game, the discourse starts to lose technical ground. And in an industry where credibility is built on real performance, not on statements, that weighs more than any viral interview. The promise was enormous. 3 brothers dominating the NBA at the same time. A last name turned into a dynasty. An independent brand facing giants. Everything seemed designed for the story to be epic. 2026 looks nothing like that trailer. LaMelo continues competing at the highest level, not because someone shouted it on television, but because his game sustains it. This season, he once again put up strong numbers. On February 22nd, 2026, he dropped 37 points and 10 three-pointers in a game. Days earlier, he made headlines for a car accident he walked away from unharmed and then played immediately after. He's on the court, he produces, he withstands the schedule, his name appears because of performance. But the empire was never just one piece. LiAngelo is no longer on the NBA map. In August 2025, he announced he was leaving professional basketball to dedicate himself to music. He released his track Tweaker and signed with Def Jam. The league stopped being his destination. The original project spoke of 3 pillars. Today, one is on a completely different stage. And then there's Lonzo, the number 2 pick of the 2017 draft, the one who carried the full weight of the narrative, the one who was supposed to be the living proof that all the noise had substance. In the 2025 to 2026 season, he played 35 games, averaged around 4.6 points, limited impact, knees that don't respond like they used to. On February 4th, 2026, he was traded from Cleveland to Utah along with 2 second-round picks the same day Utah waived him. Free agent, no team. There have been rumors of interest from teams like Golden State mentions in free agency discussions, but as of February 2026, there is no signed contract. For years, people spoke of revolution, of independence, of empire. Today, the reality is much quieter. One competes at the highest level. One changed careers. One is waiting for an opportunity that hasn't come. Big Baller Brand no longer competes with Nike. It no longer challenges anyone. It doesn't generate industry conversation. It's a memory of a moment when volume seemed enough. And when you look at the full picture, the distance between the promise and the reality isn't subtle. It's brutal. Here's something fascinating about all of this. It wasn't a small story, it wasn't a quiet mistake, it was a project that was born shouting, that chose to grow at a volume that forced everyone to look. And when you choose that path, you can no longer afford to be simply good. You have to be extraordinary. You have to back up every word, every number, every promise, because the bigger the discourse, the smaller the margin for fragility. What's interesting isn't that there was exaggeration. There always is in sports. What's interesting is what happens when narrative becomes structure, when marketing becomes a business model, when a last name becomes a company. At that point, belief isn't enough. You need everything to work at the same time. Maybe it was ambition pushed to the limit or the belief that noise could replace structure. For a while, it looked like the beginning of something historic, but time always rearranges things, and today, what remains is something very different. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.